Tonight on Nation to Nation, drama at the AFN Special Chiefs Assembly. Chief Commissioner Marion is asked for her resignation.
Right, I'm sorry to say that, but I think you have to go. You need to step down.
A Manitoba leader is adamant Bowler must go.
She seems cold. She seems like she's leading by her head, and she should be leading by her heart.
And the Indigenous Services Minister makes bold promises.
Our fundamental commitment is to respect and uphold the implementation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, including the right to self-determination, including self-government.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. Hello, I'm Todd Lamarand. Today we're coming to you from the floor of the AFN Special Chiefs Assembly. And the morning was dominated by the appearance of the inquiry's Chief Commissioner, Marion Bowler. When it came to questions from the floor, there was tough talk.
Canada has to get it right. There's a stark reality between the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and this national inquiry on missing murdered women. Why? Was it about the money? Was it about the organization? Or is it about how it's being led? We need true leadership on this national inquiry.
It is nothing but a gong show, a circus show. I was at your inquiry, and the terms that you used for this child, you said she was not considered a human being under Canadian law. That's what you said to me. That's what you said to me in September, that my child is not considered a human being. How dare you have the nerve, the audacity to speak to me that way?
And I mean, no disrespect to you, because you're probably a brilliant human being. But I tell you, you're not a brilliant commissioner for this inquiry. I'm sorry and not sorry at the same time that I have to tell you. And I'm kind of repulsed that you're actually here, because in the summertime you didn't even acknowledge our concerns. I was on TV right after you, and you told the reporter that even if the Chiefs of Canada supported you, our calls for you to resign, you wouldn't heed to it. And how dare you come here and stand here and give us a report? You didn't even show any emotion when these women are suffering here. I don't understand that. And you're standing here giving us a report, hoping that we'll support an extension of the work that we don't understand, and that doesn't belong to you. We need to see you resign, unfortunately, and I know that more women believe that all of you should resign. But for me personally, it's you. We saw a commission that is falling apart and is not doing the work that the women and children and men fought for, and I'm sorry to say that, but I think you have to go. You need to step down to salvage this inquiry.
I'm always grateful for constructive criticism because it's helpful to the work that we do. But I want to say that our work is always based on the very strong principle that families and survivors come first. That's been the driving force of our work, and our bottom line, that our women and girls are sacred.
Commissioner Bowler, you got an earful. The moderator called it strong words. People say the inquiry is off the rails. Grand Chief asked personally for your resignation. I mean, how do you respond to that?
I think it gives you an example of just what an emotionally laden job this is, to look at losses that people have endured, their grief, their pain, their anger. It spoke volumes about the state that we as Indigenous people are in.
Of course, I could go through a litany of criticisms of the inquiry, from a toxic work culture to the turnover of nearly 24 staff. You spoke in your comments about there are valid criticisms. What are some of your valid criticisms in your mind?
Well, several of them that we've already acted on, and some of the criticisms have had to do with aftercare, and we've changed some of the processes and contractors, that sort of thing, for aftercare. And we included recommendations about health services, expansion of health service for people who have been in the National Inquiry, because we've been told, and we see it in the hearings, that people need more aftercare.
With all these criticisms and the talk of asking the government for more time and money and the talk of a reset, should the inquiry maybe pause, maybe just not continue with its work until these things get worked out?
We can't stop. Families and survivors are telling us all across Canada, don't stop. We want to have the opportunity to tell our stories, to make our recommendations. If anything, they're telling us to get on with it.
And you talked about, again, you're going to make a formal request to the federal government for more time and money. I guess, what's the timeline for that?
Before Christmas, we intend to make our request to the federal government.
What happens if they turn down your request? How can you continue with your work then?
Well, we will continue, but it won't be as in-depth. It won't be as broad. It won't be as detailed. There will be voices that will not be heard.
Obviously, there's a lot of people who are hurt, they're upset, they want the inquiry to help them with that. Do you think that the inquiry, the mandate was too broad, that you just can't fulfill the wishes of these families?
I appreciate it may seem like I'm not answering your question, but I have to tell something that's really important here. When we go through a hearing with a family or a survivor, it becomes very clear that this is a healing process for them, and they tell us that. They have told us things like, after talking to you today, we can finally let go of the lost loved one. We can let their spirit go. They've also said words like, I'm so glad I finally got to tell my story to someone who's listening to me. So it's a healing process already for families and survivors.
Of course, some say they're being re-victimized. I mean, what do you say to them when they don't feel that? They don't feel like they're healing?
Well, just to repeat what I said, we're hearing from families who have gone through the actual process that it's helping them in their healing. It's one step. It's not the whole healing for them, obviously, but it's one step in the right direction. And that's what they are telling us, the participants.
Again, you mentioned the TRC got 7 years. You've only got 2 years. Yes, shouldn't somebody have recognized back when this got started that maybe bitten off more than you could chew?
I think that's really a question to ask the politicians. We were given the time frame, the budget, and the terms of reference from them. You may want to ask them what their deliberations were.
What do you think they could do better then to help the inquiry?
Well, I think it's pretty clear to agree to more time and more money. Yes, the paperwork is done. We just have to fine-tune it. We're getting advice, in process of getting advice on our draft from a variety of sources across Canada. When we're ready, and it will be before Christmas, it's going to be a solid request, because we can't come back to the government in 2 years and say, okay, we need another year, like TRC had to do. We have to do it right from the beginning.
So it's a 2-year extension you're asking for?
At this point, that's what we're asking our advisors about. What do you think about a 2-year extension? But it's ultimately going to be our request at the end. But we are seeking advice from a variety of sources about length of time, type of work, that sort of thing.
Again, it seemed like I'm harping on it, but you mentioned you didn't want the inquiry, the work to be superficial. That what you produce is superficial. If the government, again, doesn't give you the time and money, is there a risk of that happening?
Yes, there is. Definitely.
And I guess how would people look at the work then? Would it be worth? It certainly, I imagine, wouldn't be on the same level as the TRC or RCAP reports then.
Well, I can't speculate that far in the future, but what I can say is there will be voices that won't be heard. There'll be stories that won't be told, and there'll be research that won't be done, and there will be experts and others who won't be heard from either. But for me, the biggest concern is we won't have heard from all of the families and survivors who want to speak to us. Okay.
Okay, we'll let you go. Thank you for
so
doing
much.
this.
Thank you.
When we come back, I talked to Grand Chief Sheila North Wilson. Welcome back to Nation to Nation. As we heard before, Manitoba Watanabe Okamakinak Grand Chief Sheila North Wilson pulled no punches. She said the MMIWG inquiry is falling apart. She was repulsed by Chief Commissioner Marion Buller's presence at the AFN's Chief Assembly and said Buller should resign. Grand Chief North Wilson joins me now. Thank you. Welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thank you very much, Todd.
Why did you feel you had to really go after the Commissioner earlier today?
Well, I tried hard not to make it personal because I know that women are suffering, women and girls, survivors and families are suffering. So it was hard not to get personal, but I didn't want to disrespect her either. But she needed to know that this process under her leadership is not working, it's not effective. She's just re-victimizing the survivors and families, and that's not what we wanted. That's not what families wanted. So she needed to know that the process is flawed, and under her leadership specifically, in my opinion, it's not going the right way.
Why shouldn't the inquiry be extended? I think you mentioned that as well. You don't want to see it extended.
Well, I would like to see it extended under a different leadership, different lead commissioner. If that was the case, then yes, I think we do have to extend it. I don't think 2 years is enough to really get the scope, especially if we're going to take time to listen to all of those victims' impact statements first. But I think we need to spend more time on the root causes of what's causing the issue to keep going. So everything from policing to poverty to the healthcare system to all of the different forms of justice system, including the high incarceration rates. We need to focus on that and start the healing process for the women. And I think now also is we're spending too much time showing the victim side of the situation, and we need to see them being vindicated. We need to see them being empowered. It's heartbreaking to see them day after day on TV crying, and we know that. I think the people that know the issue already understand that there is a hurting population here, but now we need to move past that and start connecting the stories on why there are these issues that keep going.
What is it about her leadership in particular that makes you think she's not suited for the role she has right now?
Well, I was one of the people that defended the inquiry at the beginning when the families were wanting to give up so quickly, and I didn't understand why either. But when I saw that people under her leadership were leaving, that showed to me that her leadership style is maybe not the right style for this kind of inquiry, because we need someone that is leading by the heart. So, I tried to convince the families to stay with it, at least in Manitoba, and they gave it a good chance. But when we saw the resignations and then we saw how families were feeling, I couldn't support it anymore. And so when I heard her myself and seen how she conducts herself, and even today was a very good example of how she seems cold. She seems like she's leading by her head, and she should be leading by her heart. There was a family standing in front of her, one young man vomiting in a bag, and a woman sobbing, and she didn't even flinch to try and acknowledge that these people were standing in front of her crying and obviously in turmoil. She didn't have the compassion enough to pause and to honor them for their hardship. So that's problematic.
So how much weight does this resolution have? You've called for a resolution, was passed. Yes, let's extend the inquiry, but not under her leadership. Do you think that will have any weight and maybe leading to her resignation?
Well, it has a lot of weight to us as leaders, and it did even in July when we called for it. That wasn't supported when we called for her to be removed at the time in July. But even at that time, she told the media, and I saw her myself say that even if it had passed, she wouldn't step down. So to me, she doesn't have any respect for this process of leadership. And so now I'll be curious to see what she does with this, and if it's truly up to her, and if she is the linchpin, then I hope that she gets the message now that we need to reset it, and she can't be the one to lead it anymore.
Very quickly, if she steps down, do you think the inquiry can survive a resignation of that magnitude?
Of course, yeah. Because I think what the families need and are asking for is someone that has the heart for the issue, not just someone that has a head for it. And I had a chance to personally ask her, and I respected her for taking up the challenge, because I don't think it's an easy task. And I asked her to help us find someone else that actually cares about the issue in a heartfelt way, not just in a legal sense. So, you know, I wish her well, and I hope that she does heed to the call. And I don't mean any disrespect to her, but this is more than just about the commissioners. This should be owned and felt like it belongs to the families.
Well, thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
When we come back, I talk to Indigenous Services Minister Jane Philpott. Welcome back to Nation to Nation. A year ago, there was no such thing as the Department of Indigenous Services. Jane Philpott has now become a key figure for Indigenous people in the federal government. Her department covers such things as health, education, and infrastructure. She delivered her department's first address to the AFN's Special Assembly.
We aim that the design, delivery, and control of services should be led by Indigenous peoples for Indigenous peoples. And when that is fully achieved, there should no longer be a need for the Department of Indigenous Services in the federal government. I believe this may be the first time in Canadian history that a federal government department has been created with its eventual obsolescence as an intentional outcome from the start.
Welcome to Nation to Nation, and thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
I've heard a lot of things in your speech earlier. I'm going to just get right off the bat here. There's talk certainly earlier today about S3. There's worries about S3. There's going to be a lot more people, possible band members, perhaps coming on to something like FNIB. How has the government anticipated what's going to be happening?
Well, as you know, the first step was to remove the discrimination in the Act that discriminates against people on the basis of gender. And so you may be aware of the fact that yesterday an amendment was passed that was put forward and supported by the Senate to fully withdraw the discriminatory measures in the Act. Now going forward, in terms of putting that in place, obviously that needs to be done in a way that will be supported by First Nations, and communities will need to have input and make decisions as to what that will look like, because obviously it has an impact on communities.
So until you have these consultations, you won't know exactly what budgets might be for your department?
Well, there have been estimates, of course, and you know, Minister Bennett has done a lot of work on this area, and there have been estimates in place as to what the implications could be, but there's still work to be done in terms of understanding that, and we want to make sure, obviously, that as we move forward and enable the legislation to take effect, that those responsibilities will be made clear to communities.
I also talked about education. There was I heard the phrase Equity Plus funding for education. Is this something that's in the works? Is this going to be new funding, or is this just funding from the previous two budgets?
Well, first of all, as you know, there were significant investments in education starting in Budget 2016 that have made a huge difference. And in fact, yesterday the Chiefs passed a further resolution associated with some work that the Chiefs Committee on Health has done to unlock another bucket of money, close to $700 million of additional resources that will now be ready to flow out to communities. So our goal is to make sure that every First Nations child should have access to a high quality education, and that the resourcing should be equitable in terms of what provincial resources are, but we also acknowledge that in some cases additional resources are required to respond, for example, to language and culture education, programs like land-based training. And so this is what has been asked for, and this is our commitment to continue to work with communities on delivering that.
I was struck that you talked about that your job is actually to dismantle your department someday, so that First Nations control it. Does that mean that a First Nations or Indigenous bureaucracy is going to replace your department someday?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and this is an area where I know that a lot of First Nations are very interested in building capacity in terms of a civil service within First Nations, building up the capacity of communities to be able to do the delivery of whether it be healthcare, education, infrastructure, etc. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but our fundamental commitment is to respect and uphold the implementation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, including the right to self-determination, including self-government. And that means that increasingly we believe that nations will want to draw down jurisdiction to take control of these various sectors, including education and child and family services, for example. As they do so, there will be less need for the federal government to play that role.
Now, of course, I know you've only been in your position for 3 months. Have you formulated why, in the past, delivering services for Indigenous people was so bad? Was it just a question of funding, or was it something in the bureaucracy that meant, for example, I complained when I moved here from Manitoba getting an Ontario driver's license, how long it took me, but that's nothing compared to the state getting a status card, for example. Why is it so hard to get a status card, for example?
Well, there are probably a whole range of reasons why it's been difficult in the past. You certainly pointed to one of them in terms of the resources, and when you look at the socioeconomic gaps, they exist in part because of inadequate resources, but the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action asks our government and other governments to acknowledge that those gaps exist because of past government policies. And so I fully acknowledge that policies in the past have been discriminatory, and ultimately what's at the bottom of the fact that those gaps exist is that past governments have not moved forward on the basis of a recognition of rights, the inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights of Indigenous peoples. We're fundamentally committed to that, and on the basis of that recognition of rights, I believe that services will be drastically improved.
My final question, and it's kind of a quick one, is you've only got 2 more years in your mandate. You think you're going to get this all done in those 2 years?
You know what? You can't undo the damage that's been caused by generations of a colonial attitude of domination and assimilation, but we are committed to work forward. I hope we'll get another mandate and be able to continue this good work. It'll be up to Canadians to decide that, of course, but we want to make sure that we set things in motion that will affirm that respect for rights, and we hope that we will continue quickly on the journey to reconciliation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for talking to me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Next week, our political panel returns for one last go-around before the House of Commons breaks for Christmas. I'm Todd Lamoran from the AFN Special Chiefs Assembly. Have a great night, and I'll see you again next week.